Okay, welcome back to Attack 404. Today we're going to be going over what it's like to be a SOC analyst and kind of, a day in the life of. Some of this information may align properly, some of it won't, but I'm going to do the best that I can in order to exemplify that. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the basics in becoming a SOC analyst. And a lot has to do with some prior computer knowledge, and it's not a heavy emphasis on prior computer knowledge. You can have an interest in computers and basically excel at it, or you could be paired with somebody who understands the information security landscape or IT landscape that could kind of mold you and get you where you need to be. I'm pretty sure there were times in my career in the beginning that I was a pain in the ass to people. I've had to remember where I came from in order to help them, and that's basically what propels us forward. So something of an A plus or a Sec plus would be beneficial. You don't always have to start in help desk. Now, I do understand that when we first start out, the worst advice that you could ever get, and I'm a tad bit guilty of this as well, is you should build a lab. While this is some really good advice and it would give you hands-on experience, do you need a lab? No, because this is very expensive. And the latter part of this is Mac OS and Apple itself is a high-priced piece of crap. So a lot of people might tell you need to get involved with Apple before you become a full security expert, and that's not really true. Starting with something with Windows and then virtualizing Linux can help you a great deal. A lot of the tools that you would find in Mac OS are available in Linux, and if you do set your sights on a Unix operating system, then most of the tools that you'll be using in Mac OS will probably almost be the same. So that could be, doing any type of triage or incident response. Learning some of those tools and applying it to what you need to find out will help you until you can actually save up the funds and purchase a Mac. Some knowledge on operating system administrations can help, and this could be, setting up basic user accounts, permissions for those user accounts, applications that they should and shouldn't have access to. All of that kind of plays a role. You could do this on a very small scale computer system that you own, and you could delegate different user accounts to users that are in your home. And then from that, you can start looking into the virtualization aspect and then start putting up, Windows Server and things like that, and experimenting with the license features that you have for the free version of it before they expect you to pay for it. Any type of analytical skills in how you come to root cause analysis, and this again comes from the A+ certification because they will ingrain this in you from day one. If the system doesn't turn on, is it plugged in? Is the power cord plugged into the back of the computer? Is it on the right voltage setting? Is the power supply good? Is the power supply connected to the motherboard? And all of this kind of leads back. So understanding how things work and then following that chain all the way back will definitely help you. And it would also help you put together any type of investigations or root cause analysis if something is going wrong. Finally, a big portion of this is articulating how to express what is going on in both speech and in written contexts. Many times, a lot of people have issues bridging that gap, and I was guilty of this when I first started. I knew how to talk tech, I didn't know how to talk people, and that caused a lot of problems, and 9 out of 10 times it was, let me do my thing, it'll work, and go away. Sadly, in organizations, it doesn't work that way. So when you're in the middle of doing an investigation, you're going to need to not only articulate what happened, but also how to convey that in a lessons learned, a ticket that you've filled out, and then finally talking to people that hold positions of tech that aren't really tech. And you normally find this in some managers and kind of typical at the VP level. So now we're going to start talking about the moderate knowledge that you need to know, and a lot of this draws from the basics into the current topics. So if you could understand a scripting language or a programming language like Python, C, PHP, JavaScript, PowerShell, any of those languages, these can play vital roles in either automations or they can play vital roles in how an attack can come together. A lot of the times you might see that an attacker is going to use something like PowerShell or other types of scripting languages in order to execute and provide functions to obtain a foothold or download malware. That is something that you'd need to kind of weed through. JavaScript could be used for cross-site scripting and things of that nature. And the biggest thing in programming and scripting is that you could automate things out of and off of your plate, and it'll help you save time. C and C++ get you a little bit closer to the assembler, And if you have a proclivity to wanting to know how to reverse engineer, that's great. Not many people do, and I'm not putting emphasis on that. One of my friends, Nick Horrigy, he was big and still is big into reverse engineering and assembly in C, and he kind of pushed me to want to go that route, and slowly but surely I am ultimately getting there. Understanding how software installs in your operating system is also another key component, and the reason why I say this is a key component because not only will you understand who has access to the software, as we spoke about in the basics, but it would also give you an idea of how that software installed, where it installed, and how it affects the system. Is the software linked to old libraries? Is it overwriting new libraries with old ones? Is it setting up run points? Is it an older version that's accessible to the world? Is it only accessible to the local network? This can paint a broader picture when you start getting involved in vulnerability management and patch management. Another thing that you might want to take a look at and understand is different types of access methodologies. And that could be MACDAC, role-based access control, Bella-Padula, and how those access systems grant users access, keep that access, and potentially how that access can be abused. And also auditing access when and if accounts are created. You know if a user in a certain group has too much permissions or not enough. This was one of the things that I came across in one of my previous employers where I had been given a little bit more access than I should have. And in obtaining that access, I found stuff that shouldn't have been on shares. Although it was a bad thing that they did, providing me with more access, it ended up being a blessing because we ended up finding that they were storing things on those shares that shouldn't have been shared. Internet protocols, and this kind of should be in the basics, but I know a lot of people kind of struggle with a lot of the internet protocols. This is one of the things that you need to understand how SSL and DNS kind of work, and the attacks that could come out to play. Also, IP addressing is a very, very, very big one. More so in the IPv4 space because I see a lot of L1s that don't have a lot of exposure to networking give us non-routable IP addresses for the internal network to block. Or what they'll do is they'll try to block non-routable IP addresses or even submit them to things like VirusTotal. Also, understanding how domains are, how the domains are registered. That make a big difference. And this is more in your analysis portion. You don't want to start blocking a subdomain of Microsoft and knock out all of Microsoft because someone used the Microsoft domain to spread malware. This starts to get on a little bit of a dicey kind of subject, and we can talk about that in another video. Other tools for threat intel that at this point you should be kind of aware of in your moderate knowledge is VirusTotal, Have I Been Pawned, and any OSINT. Cole had put together some OSINT resources that I will be sharing with you. I will give him a shout in the description as well. And things that can help you identify your threat actor. Have I Been Pawned can not only help you with trying to determine if John in the C-suite is getting emails because they just figured out his name magically, or was he exposed to a data breach where he was using his corporate email address in a sense where he shouldn't have. And Have I Been Pawned could be plugged into that, and from that you could start enforcing policies where they should be enforced, because if he's using his email address for social media, and that is in the acceptable use policy is a no-no, then he's going to have something reamed. VirusTotal is something that you could use, and it should be also part of the basics, but in the moderate knowledge, I place this because if we start doing analysis on malicious software or scripts, you don't want to start exposing that to VirusTotal, and I'll get to that at a later point. This is where things become more interesting because this is kind of the key point in how you start getting into threat intel and threat hunting. Knowing something like Splunk or Waza, ElkStack, and I probably said that other one wrong, will help you do an in-depth investigation, and eventually I am going to start showing how to put your searches together in order to tell the story of what's going on using Splunk and also Waza, and eventually we're going to get into the ElkStack as well. But using those in order to kind of hunt and find out what systems were affected and basically leading to stopping the bleeding. Knowledge on any intrusion detection systems and how they operate, and more so YARA for malware, is kind of crucial. It's not really needed, but this is a stepping stone into the engineering side of the house. If you understand how to put together intrusion detection rule sets and you understand regular expressions, this could kind of lead into doing SIEM engineering. extracting information from the SIEM. And then this connection component can also be used in automations if you're using things like XOR, and Tines is another automation platform, and I believe Splunk has Phantom, or whoever owns Phantom, and you can kind of start tying those into with regular expressions on alerts and logic, and then automating some of that stuff out of your plate. But understanding how rule sets and IDS come together is also a crucial role. Not much needed in the field. There's no heavy emphasis on creating rule sets, so take that one with a grain of salt. And finally, understanding some basic form of malware analysis, either static or dynamic, and also phishing analysis, will help you along the way. Later on, we're going to be taking a look at doing phishing analysis and email analysis, so this will plug back into some of the knowledge that you would know. I'm mostly focusing on the moderate segment, because at some point you should have the basics already down, and you should be looking for more with the YouTube series that I'm coming out with. Lastly, we have the advanced, and this is more, again, with a grain of salt, and some of the things that I've seen that I would say is important. Reverse engineering, and again, shout out to Nick Horgy for all the resources he's given me. Reverse engineering malware and how malware works is kind of crucial in an environment where you're being attacked with a specific threat actor. Also, this can lead into reverse engineering and exploitation. And if you understand what you're exploiting, this could go into AppSec, where you're guiding the team on what libraries or how they should be developing software to limit the exposure and risk for buffer overflow and exploits along that line. Pivoting off of the moderate knowledge, you can get into security engineering with regular expressions and developing rule sets. Another thing would be secure network diagrams and how to develop secure networks, and what pieces of network design you would need. North-south traffic, west-east traffic, how to firewall that, and everything along those lines, and specifically what devices you need in certain locations in order to provide more security. SIEM tuning and YARA configuration and EDR is also an important key factor. YARA will help you with detections for malware. EDR will kind of help you guide the team as to what folders don't have many restrictions or do have restrictions. Then you could start filtering and providing them with tools and access to incidents if in the event they happen, and you don't want those tools getting involved or enveloped in with the EDR. So this will be more like the endpoint protection aspect and rolling that out. Incident response is a very big component of information security, because if in the event something does end up happening, you need to understand and get to root cause of how it happened, what tools are available that you need to live off the land in order to get that done, or things like Redline and other tools that will help you with that, and then correlate that data, put that back into the SIEM, find out patient zero, how to triage that, and how to get that basically blocked or contained. And that also leads into, lessons learned. SOAP platforms is one of the last steps as well in more advanced portion of the career before you go to a higher level. And this is more along the lines of automating a lot of the tasks that L1s and L2s would normally see, and helping them with their analysis so that they only need to make quick decisions on blocking, false positive, and tuning, and anything else that comes down the pike or along the way. Depth of understanding to assist and lead with previous levels of analysis. This is where the whole thing of being able to articulate thought process in writing and in speech comes to play. So what you would normally want to do is create a document that details in the ticket normally what is going on with the event that you're investigating, and if in the event that is something more like an incident. Documenting that in the ticket could then go into providing a lessons learned, and then ultimately from that lessons learned it goes into how to further protect the environment, and that'll normally be shown to management and higher ups. And then from that we start creating SOPs to remedy that issue if it happens again, train on how to fix that issue, detect that issue, and then also make sure it doesn't happen in the future or something similar doesn't occur. So now that we've taken a look at everything else, let's take a look at some of the red flags in the SOC and what you need to kind of look out for when trying to choose an environment to work in, and some of the questions you need to ask, because some of these are on our list, and I've spoken to my friend Ramel. We had gone through some of the red flags at companies that we've worked at and basically compiled somewhat of a decent list of things that you could look for. So what you really need to watch out for. So high turnover is one of the things at almost every company you need to take a look at and ask how many people work in the environment, how long they've been there, and things of that nature. When we had first started at the company where me met, meaning Ramel and I had noticed that there was a very high turnover. Maybe they had 3 or 4 people working first shift. They had 2, sometimes +1, sometimes -1, that were working on the second shift, and then it was myself before they ended up hiring Ramel. And I've seen a lot of interns coming in and out at the company, and it was very difficult to staff, which bleeds into the second point, is not enough SOC workers in the environment. If they're trying to do a follow the sun and the organization is very cheap, and by cheap I mean not hiring adequate staff, what they'll do is they'll staff the environment with probably 3 people per shift. While that's good, certain things can happen where you might have 2 people take off at the same time, either being sick or taking vacation, or those people leaving. There's a lot of variables that could come to play. And if they're not doing 4 people per shift at minimum, start to question. Sometimes we would drop down to 1 person for the night shift, and that was on 2 days out of the entire week. So that can become stressful when you're working in a SOC environment. As a newbie, take heed to that. Another issue is they're slow to fix and tune alerting, and normally what happens, especially for newcomers in information security, is you're going to hit something called alert fatigue, and this ends up being a constant battery of tickets. Most of the time the same crap you've seen previously, and you have to close it out. Some managers are impossible to work with, and they don't want you to link tickets. They want an in-depth analysis, because we call it SDS. You can Google that, and that's basically what I'll leave it that as. Another thing is office workers that like to talk smack and talk shit about other workers. I've seen this in the environment where I had met Ramel, and basically it was workers that were either jealous or felt inadequate to other workers, and instead of trying to team up with them, it was just easy to attack the character and go after what they knew how to do, and then try to state that they were wrong and get in people's ears. It's like a very bad soap opera. So you don't want to stay in an environment that's kind of structured in that way, and if they keep promoting those people, you need to dust off that resume and 86 that place. Managers and other workers, and this goes back to the gossip, like to gatekeep, and again this goes back to smack talking, and it goes all the way up the chain, so that if in the event that you want to do something, you take interest in it, one of the key things that a shitty coworker is going to do is try to keep you out of what your passion is, because that's gonna, in their mind, put them in the shadows and you into the limelight. And again, if you have workers that are working like that, especially management, you need to get rid of them like a cancerous mass as quickly as possible. So from the gossip and the workers and managers blocking could go into other teams where they like to affect other teams so that you can't move within the company or upgrade your skills to other things. So in a typical SOC environment, you'll have, let's say, threat intel, you'll have engineering and all the other components that come into play. If you see that from the 3 bullet points that we were previously discussing, that starts to bleed into other teams, there's no way for you to move, no one's going to want to work with you or your team members, and it normally, again, becomes centric around the skill set. So they attack the skill set that nobody wants to work with you, or it's difficult to train you. And if you see that, again, get rid of them. A lot of times with the previous bullet points, management that's not quite involved in the soap opera activities, they won't know the skill set of the employees that they have, or adjacent teams won't know the skill sets of, let's say, SOC team members. And then when you start doing things or thinking outside the box, it creates problems, because now it's, well, James said you don't know shit, now all of a sudden it's, you do know shit. So who's the shit talker? So that's other things that you would need to navigate. And also, one of the biggest issues is unskilled management and other workers around you, because those that are not at your level or above your level and looking to help will always look to put a knife in your back. And this is somewhat true for a lot of shitty managers that get into security that don't like being overshadowed. I've dealt with basically all of that. So some of the things that you want to run from, and I'll try to speed this up. So some of the things that you'd want to run from in a SOC are micromanagers, and we like to call them Walmart managers, without mentioning names. and that manager can via farin culo. This one particular manager came from Walmart, hence the term, and it was mostly like who's this bigger contest. I've done this, I've done that, and it's just constant, what are you doing, why are you doing it, I didn't say that, you need to do this. And when you work with a manager like that, it's no longer worth it. There's an old expression that workers don't leave bad jobs or bad companies, they leave shitty managers, and that's kind of where we stand with that. As I've said as a joke on LinkedIn, how many narcissistic managers does it take to change a light bulb? None, because they all use gaslighting. This is one of the things you really need to pay attention to. Normal gaslighting with managers is always going to be centric around training or you getting to more advanced topics within your skill set. So let's say you started off as a SOC analyst and you want to get more involved in the L2 stuff, L3 stuff, which is malware analysis, malware reverse engineering, all that stuff, or threat detections, and they keep promising you and holding time frames out. Meaning, you can't do X, Y, and Z until 6 months or 1 year. Then you get to that point, and then there's no money for training. Other people are getting trained. That's not an environment you want to work in. I've always looked at it as, even if I had workers of my own, and I've trained them to do a specific task, and they got a little too good for my environment, then best of luck to them if they want to move on or if they want to stay. And if you're looking to keep people captive and not train them, then there's no point in staying. Another major issue is lack of tooling and support, and this comes into ticket fatigue that we discussed previously. If you're getting hammered with a bunch of stuff to do and no one's giving you any tooling to help alleviate that stress and that constant workflow, you either need to voice those concerns, and if it's not getting addressed within 3 months, 6 months, get out, because they're probably not going to. Again, jealous workers is another major red flag, and I'm going to do this again, because at the first sign you start to see that this is happening, you need to either change teams, get far away from them, or get out. Another key component is what I like to call meningitis. Yes, this is taken from the meningitis, which is the inflammation of the meninges in the brain. And meningitis affects a similar part of the brain that makes normal workers think that they are a manager. I've seen this with quite a few individuals on the team that try to delegate tasks when they don't want to do it. They become condescending, and it's just a back and forth, I'm going to tell you to do this, while simultaneously kissing a manager's ass. So if you see that, avoid them. It's probably going to get worse as time goes on if the manager or managers don't correct that problem. So you might want to get away from that. High requisites for a position that you're getting into. If it's, let's say you're applying for an L2 position and they're telling you your skills are considered L3, but we really see you in this environment as an L2. If you're desperate and you need a job, take it, but don't put too much faith behind that job, because it's just basically going to be constant abuse. Rotations is another situation that you need to look at from cost/impact analysis. If you're young enough where your body can take the issues that come along with doing rotations, fine, go for it. If you're getting older, then I would say don't, because it does take a toll on your health and how you sleep and your mood, and you might not be the quote-unquote happy camper you want to be, if you like camping, I don't know. Again, no signs of growth or ways to enhance your skills, or if they're gatekeeping any of that or gaslighting the training, get out. Find an environment that's going to value you and value your training and what you bring to the table. A lot of the times, if your skills that you demonstrate are devalued or they're trying to find holes in it, this is another issue. Ramel and I have dealt with that at a previous employer. Only problem was that he was new in the environment and he would keep quiet about it, and I would tell them in the most professional and romance language way, via farin culo, and if they didn't like it, that's too bad. I'm not there to kiss your ass. I'm there to get results and protect the environment and do my job. SOC improvement is another issue where if they're not improving the experience on how you triage things, they're not taking the feedback into consideration of the workers when they say these tickets need to either be tuned or eliminated, give us new tools, or even improve the overall knowledge of the SOC and introduce tools that give more visibility. It might be time to leave, especially if this is 6 months or greater. And finally, vague direction and lack of leadership, and this is a major issue. And normally what will happen is we're hands off. And while that is great, and a lot of people can work that way, and I love working that way, it becomes problematic when hands off becomes a blame game, where you're doing a specific function and then all of a sudden management takes an issue with that, and they don't give you any clear feedback on what direction they want that to go in. Another issue is when they create alerting and they don't train you on how to do that alerting, or SOPs, standard operating procedures, which can help you solve any of the issues or look into the alert that's being generated. Finally, what you should stick around for. So any encouragement to acquire new skills or on-the-job training, and they pay for the training, go for it. One thing that I don't like, and I don't think this is a practice anymore, back in the day, if you got certified on the job, your license was only valid for that company. I've heard quite a few companies do that. I've never come across it. I've heard it discussed, but that's not something I would want. So if you went for an OSCP, let's say, it would be the company's license that you'd be operating under. I don't think that's a thing anymore. Or if it was just a load of crap. But that's something to look out for. Clear and welcoming communication between all of the teams. If you're working in a SOC environment where Intel talks to the SOC and SOC also can talk to management, and everybody's just basically kicking ideas back and forth and working with one another, that is where you want to be. That is a company you want to grow with. That is a company that you want to get trained for, because they actually care about the environment, and they also care about what each team brings to the table and how there's interoperability between those teams. Mentorship is another big one, because if you're not getting trained in a mentorship program or someone that can mentor you in things that you are interested in, let's say malware analysis or engineering, reverse engineering, and any other topics that encompass security, that's always a great plus. Trustworthy coworkers, I don't think I really need to go in depth with that. Accountability and correction of issues in a very healthy and constructive way with feedback. And I'll give an example. Long time ago, an alert came in. I hastily read the alert wrong. It was a known good hash where a malicious hash should have been, and I ended up blocking CMD almost 5 minutes to my shift ending, while I was on the phone with my manager and Ramel. Ramel caught it, questioned it. Manager started to laugh. Asked who blocked it. I realized it was me. We corrected the issue. We moved on from the issue. We all laughed about it. And from time to time, it was brought up to poke fun, or as we like to call, break balls, or professional pool playing. And that became one of the things that, we did back and forth in a fun kind of way. I've also come across things that Ramel had blocked, which he shouldn't have blocked, and I amended the tickets for him before it became a problem, and he's done the same for me. If you have team members that are willing to do that, you're in a really good environment. Lastly, ongoing training for new detections, and I mentioned this previously, is a big thing, and it should not be overlooked, because if you're getting, surprise alerting and you don't know how to do it, and you're waking people up at 3 o'clock in the morning, or you need to bother someone about an alert, that shouldn't really be a thing. They should be creating documents to help you process those alerts, and if you have any other questions, you could ask the other team members in order to either enrich or make the process better or streamline it. So what does a SOC analyst do? Oh, I'm glad you asked. So there's a lot of monitoring, and that's basically the bulk of what an L1, L2 will do, and they're going to monitor, I'm going to start from top left and go to right and then keep going. The network, the endpoint, what the user activity is, if there's anything in the cloud or Office 365. They're going to mostly handle email blocks if they're given that permission to do so. And they're also going to be responsible for triaging email. Is this malware? Is this phishing? Is it spam? Is it legitimate? And then a quick little write-up on that, and then that gets kicked up, and the environment does what it does with it. Web applications is another thing you'll start to see that you might monitor, depending on the complexity of the environment. And that could be WAFs, that could be, as mentioned in the one below, it could also be web application attacks, it could be anomalous traffic, too much traffic, things like that. Firewalling is another one, whether they're using Palo Altos or F5s or any other type of firewall technology, you might get forwarded those requests. And if you see a bunch of traffic or ports being accessed, then you have to look into that. WAF was already mentioned, I'm not going to go there again. Some environments may actually have mobile applications that monitor the overall health and security of iPhones and Androids. That application is called AirWatch. Then it's going to go down to, any of your potentially networking equipment, maybe PBX. And then it's going to go down to malicious activity or social engineering that you may find. We've had a bunch of those where a weird email address claimed it was the CEO of a company, and a dude actually run out and bought gift cards. I mean, I'm not getting into that. But anyway. So investigation and response is going to come from also a bunch of other things in the mix. So you'll have different log sources. You have your intrusion detection. And log sources can be from the endpoint themselves. This could be, any of the var log messages inside of Linux. It could be the event viewer in Windows and anything else that Mac OS does. Intrusion detection systems like Snort. I don't really see this often, but sometimes looking at the standards of how the communication protocols act can set up red flags, and understanding how they work can potentially find things like alternate data streams or alternate communications that RFC doesn't specify. OSINT is another one that we've seen within the last few years, and OSINT is basically going to lead back and tell you what threat actors are doing or the exposure of the people that are being attacked, and going out and limiting that information. And this could fall into tools that provide brand impact and stuff like that the analyst will need to know. So it'll be like, what's my name.app. Cole actually put together a list of OSINT tools that I will be putting in the description, so you can check those out. Threat intel is also another thing that analysts are now getting into, where we start to see tickets that are enriched with data, like let's say malicious hashes, domains, IP addresses, things of that nature. And then also looking at what the community is providing on GitHub and anywhere else you may pull that from. And we'll talk about that as we progress. IP reputation is another one. With X-Force is one of the tools you could use. Domain tools is another one. Again, we'll talk about all of that. Fingerprinting certain issues or behavioral analysis and files, and that kind of overlaps with the behavioral in the next column. And then also the domain reputation. So all of that is basically looked at. And then finally, any online scanners, which has a mention almost at the end. So we'll take a look at that as well. And then finally, in all that you do in the monitoring and investigation and response, the last component of it is how we contain that. IP and domains are going to be done, and also port numbers are going to be done on the firewalls. So do we have any devices like Zscaler or Palo Alto that we can block that? Is it WatchGuard? Is it other types of firewalls that we may use? Are we blocking hashes for the endpoint or the firewalls, or email? If those hashes come in, we block them. Are we blocking email addresses or removing emails that may have hit other inboxes? Are we blocking user accounts or service accounts that may have been used for abuse? Are we looking at geographic locations? Geographic locations play a vital role, because if traffic is coming from a high-risk country, like China, Brazil, or whatever countries are high risk, we might need to block those or allow specific traffic if we have business segments in those countries. And then finally, it's going to fall down on system quarantine. Was the system infected? Do we have a quarantine network that we could monitor it? And that's practically what you do in a nutshell as a SOC analyst. So let's talk about the tools now. And I don't know why that's happening. So most of your SIEM sources are going to be what's listed here. There's other ones. This is just for brevity. You'll have Splunk, Logarithm, Sentinel, Wazza, Elk, QRadar, which is not my favorite, and Alien Vault. I am a fan of Splunk. I do run Wazza. I also will be running Elk, and I'm probably saying Wazza wrong, but whatever, you get the idea. And then in this subset, it's again going to come from network, endpoint, user, cloud, email, web, firewall, WAF, mobile device, networking devices. And then you'll start to see how to use these SIEM and event management systems in order to paint a broader picture. So now we're going to get into the investigation tools that we use as L1s and some L2s. CyberChef, X-Force, VirusTotal, AnyRun, which is a sandbox. Joe Sandbox is a sandbox. Domain tools is really good for the overall reputation. If the environment pays for it, it's great because you can see IP addresses and domains. A lot of the OSINT tools are free unless you're buying into them, and those could range from, let's say, Spiderfoot to Blackbird and anything in the middle. What's My Name.app is another one. Have I Been Pawned could use visibility. And we can see if the sender and the receiver have both been on any list that may have been scraped. And then what to do to get either that data down or anywhere else in that mix. And then, of course, it's going to fall back on the containment tools. What tools we have in the cloud, what tools we have in Cisco Iron Ports, Zscaler, how we block in F5, how do we block on the firewalls, on any of the other WAFs, if they're endpoints, and if we're using Agari or we're using O365 or even Proofpoint, blocking emails and restricting content in those applications as well. So I know we discussed a lot of concerns with working in a SOC, and now the next thing is going to be sandboxes like Joe Sandbox and VirusTotal. So you don't want to do file uploads to any of these resources because if you are in fact uploading a file, then your adversary is probably going to get tipped off that that binary has been uploaded, and they may either have to change the fingerprint of that file or they have to change something to escape or avoid detection. In environments where personally identifiable information or personal healthcare information is exposed, think of medical settings or HIPAA, you kind of don't want to start uploading files like PDFs and documents, because if that data is exposed and it's on the internet and anyone can see it, that becomes another liability in its own, and that falls back with the file uploads, because if there's also company-specific data in it, that's another problem. One of the other issues that we normally find is the threat actor may actually use locations like VirusTotal and bang in, let's say, ABC, NBC, Learning Channel, Nabisco, Cisco, any of those companies, and it will return things that may have been inadvertently uploaded. And now if you have a user on the network that you push, let's say, VPN software to, or applications you developed internally at the company, now threat actors can obtain those binaries, reverse engineer them, see what is exposed, and then use that to gain entry or foothold into your environment. EULA and usage agreements at these online tools are also going to dictate what is going to happen and how that data is going to be handled and exposed. Some of the things that you really want to consider when you're using some of these online tools is, do they share that data? I know Palo Alto, I think it's Unit 42, they may share data across companies, and you could opt out and not have that data shared. The duration based on execution of analysis is also another pivotal thing, because if you can't set how long the sandbox is going to execute, you might not be collecting all the data that you need. You also want to have an option where you can interact with the sandbox, so you can gather some details that may be omitted from previous reports that the sandbox generates. Containment is also another key factor in this, because if in the event it's not contained and it's exposed to the internet, then you're kind of spreading malware. And again, the threat actor is going to know, and we're going to get into that whole topic in a hot minute. Training for your analysts is crucial as well, and by your analysts, I mean yourself and the people that work with you, because if the company is not training you on it, or the sandboxing provider doesn't provide training, you just bought a shiny piece of crap. And also how the data is handled if there is any personally identifiable information or healthcare info. Does that data go out? How is it destroyed? How is it kept? What's the retention policy on that? If there is a retention policy, can you set it? And all that other good stuff. Finally, we're going to talk about the on-prem solutions and some of the concerns with on-prem solutions. And then I'm going to give my thoughts on malware and phishing analysis. One of the biggest things is a risk of infection during an analysis. What does that mean? Most of the time, you're going to get an email that comes in, or a binary that is going to be in the security inbox, and that binary has to go somewhere. If it's hands-off that it goes straight to the sandbox via API, double trouble, that's great. If it's not, then the analyst has to drag it out, upload it to the sandbox, execute it in sandbox, and hope somewhere in that line they didn't get infected. And I've seen this happen. What you want to do is you want to pull the email out itself into an MSG or EML file, and then upload that to your lab and then do your analysis from there. Threat actor detection. This is one of the things that I fought venomously at one of the previous companies because we had an individual who was well versed in forensics, and I put that in massive air quotes. And the problem was that she was trying to sell an ideology that at the epicenter of it was bullshit. So if I'm a malicious actor or threat actor and I want to infect company Z, I produce malware, I send it to them, I get some idiot that executes it, I'm notified it's been running, cool beans, great, I'm in. The malware attack process is no different in the sense of doing your analysis or reverse engineering. That binary is going to be run. I'm going to know it's going to be run. This isn't the early 90s. This isn't the late 80s where malware went on the system. It erased all your data. I got you. It's not the bullshit that it used to be. It's now, let's gain access. What can we find? That data is money. How does a threat actor leverage that data? If we trash your data, we can't make money. So the argument becomes the threat actor knows that you're doing reverse engineering on it. Now, there's a few things that could come to play in this, is that when you execute a binary, it does communicate out. If I know that that binary is supposed to be infecting, let's say, Hewlett-Packard, and I see it being run from another IP address, red flag's going to go off. Did I just infect a user on their home network? How do I... A lot of questions come to play that I'm not going to get into. But the whole idea is that you want something to... You want to do your analysis in a way where it's not on your network. No matter how you do it, the threat actor is going to know if you do dynamic analysis, and it's not really going to matter. Because the whole point of that malware is to get it to execute. So where it executes from is not 100% important. It's the fact that you're trying to find out what tactics they're using to affect your network. The other thing is when you start doing your analysis in a dynamic sense, you need to understand what types of persistence you may be dealing with. And you definitely want that analysis network outside of your production network. So something like DigitalOcean or HostWinds, that where you could spin up VMs and control them at will, that is going to benefit you. A segmented network with a different IP pool and range, that's basically what I discussed before, is also beneficial because it's not really coming from your network, and it's going to take some legwork to find out if you do own that network. They're also going to need some expertise in reverse engineering and analysis. Not 100% true. You can do some of your static analysis and collect tons of data from dynamic. If you really want to get to the nitty-gritty, you do need to understand reverse engineering. Do you need to do it right away? Not really. I'll cover some of the topics in static analysis and dynamic analysis that you could run with until we get to more advanced topics in reverse engineering. Also, the last bullet point that a company may run from this is that it could be quite expensive, and selling them on this would be looking at a specific data set or model, how it would save them money, and how it could bring value to the SOC. So some of the features that you want to gun for are dedicated hardware because it's going to be faster, and you want to have dedicated hardware to virtualize your sandboxes. I know when I was developing the sandbox for one of the companies I worked for, I spec'd out servers that we could use for that specific purpose, and we basically decked them out to no end. And that would have been virtualizing Mac OS on Intel, Linux, and also Windows. Hosted solutions somewhere else that's not on your network, always a plus. Maintaining and documenting everything that goes on with that lab is always a good sign. And this is something you should do. Because if you're not documenting all the tools and how to use them, you're just creating an expensive paperweight. Training your analysts on the specific tools and that system is going to become very important. You're going to give them a sense of worth. You'll receive a sense of worth. And you could continue that training on if it piques your interest. Also, you're in control of the software licensing. If you want to buy licensing, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. You could use a software that's always going to complain You need a license. Yeah, that's a poke to you, Microsoft. And also, you are the data custodian because that VM doesn't have anything of value on it. Whatever's getting executed is from the threat actor, and you get to capture all that queued information. The last portion of the training materials that we have so far and kind of getting you into InfoSec are going to be some of the resources that you would need, and this is also from a cost perspective analysis. So we're going to start with the columns on the left and then migrate to the right. So these are some free applications that you could start using to kind of get into the information security landscape, defensive or offensive. Tools like VirtualBox are important for virtualization. I'm not going to really mention VMware, and I'm not going to mention Parallels because they come with high costs. There are versions of VMware that are free that don't have all the bells and whistles. If you want to check that out, you can. Linux Server and Linux Desktop are the tools that you should be using, or software applications, because a lot of enterprise environments will, in fact, be running Linux, especially when it's customer facing. So all the server-side stuff is all going to be Linux. Unless they're a Microsoft Windows shop, then that's a whole different story. Windows Server does have free trials that you could run. So you could put that in a virtual appliance and then make another virtual appliance that's a desktop and connect LDAP, AD, DNS, whatever you want to mess around with. Packet Tracer is another one that you could use, and you could kind of get used to setting up the configurations for Cisco. I would try to score a cheap Cisco switch online that you could mess around with. You could get a cheap one for a few $100s. I do understand that there's cost impact in this. A lot of people that are getting into the field might not have the money to throw around for the hardware, and that's fine. OPNSense and PFSense are two firewalls that you could use. IP tables is also worth the mention. OPNSense and PFSense can also run on its own dedicated hardware. You could build something out for it. And they have tons of features. A lot of the stuff is free. Some of it is license-based. VyOS or Yavata is an operating system that is similar to Cisco IOS. So that'll give you some of the exposure of setting up routing tables and things of that nature. Kubernetes and Docker are things that you would want to take a look at to run certain applications in. A lot of companies use it. So if you want to set up something as simple as a vulnerable web application that you want to run in its own little container, that would be viable. The things with virtualization is that you will need the hardware to run it. So that's going to be an i5 or better. If you're already on Mac hardware, you have to find versions that you could run that are ARM based, and that could become its own headache. You don't want to run this on systems that have 8 gigs of RAM. That's just not going to work, and if it does, it's going to be very slow. Disk space is also going to be another issue, so you want to plan accordingly. The last thing on the security resources to take a look at are going to be things like Waza, Elk, Snort, and any SIEM you can get your hands on that's free, so you can set it up and see what the system is doing and what Nmap scans look like and things like that if you go in the offensive security route. For offensive sec, you have Parrot and Kali Linux. Those are the two go-to operating systems. There's also Black Arch, I think they use, is another one, and there's a few other ones. If you want to get involved or look at those, you're more than welcome to. GitHub has a ton of security resources. I linked a lot of them in the description. Metasploitable is a vulnerable operating system that you can start throwing attacks at, and they have Metasploitable 1 and Metasploitable 2. That you could basically see how offensive security comes together, test your skills. If you want, you could also throw an IDS on that box. You could also throw an agent that's going to communicate back with something like Waza or Elk, so you could kind of see what the attacks look like, and if you change certain parameters, how to escape detection. And then there's API testing, which I have links to in the description as well. DFIR resources, a good portion of Linux tools you can use out of the box for forensics. DD is one of them. Scalpel is another. Sleuth Kit is a Windows application that's free. Autopsy is another one. That is my go-to for forensics. Normally you'll be gathering data from, let's say, DD, or working on the disk with a write blocker. I'm not going to include resources to that just yet. Another tool that you could use is, and this is for memory forensics, you could use volatility as one to look at the memory, and to acquire them, there is FTK Imager does the acquisition for it, and you could basically use that memory acquisition inside of volatility. SIFT is a forensic focused, and well, it's actually a DFIR focused operating system that you could use. Redline is another tool that you could deploy to Mac, Linux, and Windows, and that'll gather a bunch of information on that system that you could then use to put together either incident response or forensics. Lime, AVML, and FMEM are memory tools that you could use in Linux to gather memory dumps, export them, and then throw them into volatility and do your analysis that way. If you're looking at free learning resources, GitHub has a ton of resources. Sans Community is another one. CISA is one. EC Council has free resources, and basically everything that's listed here. I also have links in the descriptions. So if you want to kind of pivot back and forth, either Offsec or defensive or DFIR, you have different resources that you could take a look at. In later videos, I'm going to go through doing an email analysis for phishing. We'll break into some malware analysis, the tools that we commonly use, and then we'll start to get into more of the advanced topics as this YouTube series progresses. So hopefully this kind of pointed you in the right direction of what you would need or what a SOC analyst does. And lastly, if you liked any of our content, please like, share, subscribe, throw us a few questions. We'll be glad to answer them if and when we have time, and we hope you enjoyed the video.